A Japanese King Kong movie based on an American Saturday morning cartoon with Doctor Who as the villain, made by the company that made those stop motion Christmas specials like Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer back in the 60s. What is going on? There's only one possible answer. The 1967 film King Kong Escapes. Easily the goofiest giant monster movie ever made, although goofy in a good way. To understand this film, the first thing you have to know is that in the 1960s, there was a monster craze here in the United States. Classic movie monsters were all the rage. Their films were being re-released in theaters. There was a lot of marketing of toys of monsters for the first time. Publications like Famous Monsters of Filmland that you can see behind me. And monsters being all the rage, there was a Saturday morning cartoon show that was based on King Kong. And what happened in this show was that a scientist brought his children to live with him on Skull Island, Kong's island full of monsters and dinosaurs. And the young boy in the family becomes friends with King Kong. And the episodes are about the different adventures that Kong and the boy have on Skull Island. Okay, first of all, terrible parenting by the scientist to bring your kids to an island full of man-eating monsters. But okay, the cartoon was pretty good. So Toho Studios, the Japanese film company that made the Godzilla films and other giant monster movies, Toho Studios wanted to do a live-action film version of this American Saturday morning cartoon version of King Kong. So they kept some of the story elements from the show and discarded others. The main villain on the cartoon show was a mad scientist named Doctor Who. No relation to the British Time Lord character. This is just another guy who happens to be called Doctor Who. And the main weapon that Doctor Who had was a robotic doppelganger of King Kong, Mechani-Kong. And Mechani-Kong appeared and fought King Kong a couple of times on the cartoon show. So Toho Studios, when they went to make this film, they didn't want to keep the family living on Skull Island, which was probably wise. But they did want to keep Doctor Who as the villain, and they did definitely want to keep Mechani-Kong as the big bad monster that King Kong would have to fight. So they put together a cast which is kind of interesting. It goes all the way from successful actors to people who weren't actors at all. Easily the most established actor in the movie was Mie Hama. She had just been in the James Bond movie You Only Live Twice, which was a very big James Bond picture. And it was interesting because there were two roles in You Only Live Twice that were written specifically for a Japanese woman to play. And there was a better role and there was a lesser role. And Mie Hama got cast for the better role, and another actress got cast for the lesser one. But when it came time for them to be tutored in English so that they could speak English in the movie, Mie Hama was terrible at learning English, just terrible. And the other actress picked up English like that. So guess what happened? The studio switched their roles, and Mie Hama wound up playing the lesser part in the James Bond picture and lost the bigger part. But she still was a Bond girl. Next in line of success, I guess, on the cast is Rhodes Reason. There were two brothers, Rhodes Reason and Rex Reason, who were both actors, and they were lookalikes. It's like trying to tell apart Liam Hemsworth and Chris Hemsworth, or Luke and Owen Wilson. Okay, if you can tell the difference between Rex Reason and Rhodes Reason, you're doing better than I am. I don't think that they could tell the difference between themselves. I'll bet you that every morning one of them would wake up and say, well, wait a minute, which one am I, Rex or Rhodes? Man, did they look alike. So, okay, we get Rhodes' reason. And this is a sort of a handsome, square-jawed, very deep-voiced character. And he plays a naval commander in this. For the female lead in this movie, there was Linda Miller. Okay, Linda Miller was not a professional actress. And I think some people are a little mean to her when they look back on this movie. She was a model by trade. She was an 18-year-old model. And a studio executive had seen her picture and thought that she looked perfect for the part and sought her out and cast her in the role. She wasn't a professional actress. Her dialogue had to be completely dubbed. Even though she spoke English, her dialogue was dubbed by a different English-speaking actress. And so there you go. We have a sort of a mixed cast. And what happens in this movie is that Doctor Who, the villain, has a scientific base up at the North Pole. And he wants to mine element X. Okay. And his great idea is that he has built a robotic King Kong to dig out the element from the bowels of the earth. And when he sends the robot to dig down to get element X, it immediately fails because the radiation screws up its systems, and the whole project is a complete failure. So now Doctor Who wants to get the real King Kong and force the real King Kong to dig out element X. Okay, so the good guys go to King Kong's island, and they encounter a dinosaur, a Tyrannosaurus-like creature. And then when it tries to eat Linda Miller's character, King Kong comes to the rescue and fights the Tyrannosaurus-looking dinosaur. Now, if this sounds familiar, you may be thinking of the fact that in the 1933 original King Kong, which is a great film, there's a very big fight between King Kong and a Tyrannosaurus Rex when the T-Rex was coming after Fay Wray's character, and King Kong came to the rescue and fought that dinosaur. So the fact that they recreated basically this scene using suit actors, suitmation, that style of special effects is called, it can only be seen as a direct defiance of the original King Kong movie's excellent battle between King Kong and the dinosaur. It's actually one of my favorite fantasy sequences in all of film. That's how much I love that battle scene in the original King Kong. So if they wanted to impress me, they had to go way above and beyond, and they really didn't. The battle scene was okay as far as Japanese giant monster movies go. And of course, King Kong wins. And in fact, King Kong kills the dinosaur in the same way that he killed the dinosaur in the 1933 original film, by prying its jaw open until it breaks and the skull fractures. So, you know, it was clearly a challenge to the original, and I don't think it delivered. But I will say the dinosaur that they showed us was great. It was the best part of the film in some ways, and I'm going to show you pictures of it later in this video. Okay, so we'll get back to that. But anyway, King Kong falls in love, of course, with Linda Miller's character. I don't know why monsters are always falling in love with human women. Wouldn't you think that they would be attracted to, you know, a female of their own kind? Why would they want a human being? It doesn't make any sense to me, but okay. So the people leave King Kong on the island, and Doctor Who's forces arrive, and they abduct King Kong. And they take King Kong to Doctor Who's base at the North Pole. If this sounds familiar, you might be thinking of the fact that in Godzilla versus Kong, which just came out about 5 years ago, King Kong went to the South Pole. So yes, King Kong has been to both the North Pole and the South Pole. How do you like that? Considering that he lives on an island that's probably about 110 degrees in the shade, the fact that he can survive in Arctic and Antarctic climates is impressive. But okay. Doctor Who gets the real King Kong as a captive, tries to make him dig out Element X. And, as you may guess from the title of the movie, King Kong escapes. So Kong has broken loose of this Arctic base, and he's trying to swim back home to his island. And what does he do? He swims to Tokyo. Why? Why does he swim to Tokyo? Only because they want the final monster battle to take place in Tokyo. That's why. There's no plot-based reason why Kong should end up in Tokyo. But it does bring up an interesting question, though. And if you're familiar with this movie, you're probably familiar with the better-known King Kong versus Godzilla from 1963. And the question is, are those two movies set in the same continuity? At first glance, you might think no, but I think it's pretty clear that they are set in the same continuity, because King Kong versus Godzilla is in the Godzilla franchise timeline, the Showa-era Godzilla films. And as we'll get to later, Gorosaurus shows up in that franchise in Destroy All Monsters. So we know that Destroy All Monsters is in the same is in the same continuity as King Kong Escapes. So I think the answer has to be yes, King Kong versus Godzilla is in the same continuity as King Kong Escapes. And the fact that Kong isn't better known to the general public after having rampaged through Tokyo 4 years earlier, I would just chalk that up to the fact that they really were not paying that much attention to continuity when they made these things. They weren't expecting people to still be talking about them 50 years later. So, all right, King Kong arrives in Tokyo. And now, of course, it's time for a final showdown. Mechani-Kong is sent into the heart of Tokyo to challenge and capture King Kong and bring him back under Doctor Who's control. And so now we get what we all been waiting for the whole movie, King Kong fighting his robot double. Okay. I timed this battle in preparation for making this video. I've seen the movie a million times, but of course I'd never bothered to time the battle. The battle is 9 minutes, 40 seconds. Okay. Godzilla has been fighting his robot double, Mechagodzilla, for over 50 years and continues to be plagued by him. King Kong reduced his robot double to a hopeless pile of scrap metal in less than 10 minutes. And in case you're wondering, yes, I am biased in favor of King Kong. And a few years ago, when Godzilla vs. Kong came out, although I love Godzilla, I was totally Team Kong. Okay? So I admit my bias. Put Kong and Godzilla against each other, I'm going to root for Kong anytime. So what happens is that although the robotic King Kong is mechanical and can't get tired like Kong can, Kong, of course, is more agile. And ultimately, the robot retreats up Tokyo Tower, and King Kong climbs up Tokyo Tower after it. And it's actually a pretty good sequence, at least as these kind of movies go, when the robotic Kong and the real Kong are chasing up the side of Tokyo Tower. And of course, Kong overpowers Mechani-Kong, and the robot falls and smashes to a million bits at the street level far below. And King Kong is at the top of Tokyo Tower, just like he was at the top of the Empire State Building all those years ago, and roars in triumph. Sounds like the end of the movie, but it's not. They still have to deal with Doctor Who. The next morning, I don't know why it's taken until then, Doctor Who and his henchmen are making their getaway aboard their ship, and they're pulling out of Tokyo Harbor. And the good guys send King Kong to stop their ship. And there was a fairly good sequence of Kong attacking the ship as it's pulling out into the harbor waters, smashing the smokestacks, making a complete wreck of the deck. And interestingly enough, prying the propeller off of the ship and hurling it onto the deck. And if that sounds familiar to you, you might be thinking of the fact that King Kong was also fixated on propellers in Kong Skull Island, the modern day legendary series of films, first King Kong entry, where he took the propeller off of a wrecked ship and used it as a weapon against the bad monsters. So now you've got two monsters where Kong fought them with human-made propellers. So that brings us to the end of the film. And of course, Kong swims home safe and sound. And I didn't feel any need to give you a spoiler alert, because in a movie like this, you already know that the good guy is going to win. This movie is incredibly goofy, but it's goofy in a good way. And in a moment, I'm going to show you some pictures, and you'll see exactly what I mean when I say that it's goofy. Any adult looking at the monster suit, especially for King Kong, is just going to laugh. The suit for King Kong is so bad. And remember now, this is 1967. It would be less than 10 years into the future that the awesome monster suit was used for the 1976 King Kong remake, the Dino De Laurentiis film, which was a great suit. So, you just can't compare. The one here is so bad. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to show you a couple of pictures from the film and make a couple of remarks for you. Okay, here we go. Yes, this really is the King Kong suit they used in this film. Look at the eyes. You could honestly have a school play make an ape costume and it would come out better than this. It's so bad. This is Kong beating the heck out of a sea serpent that was attacking his new friends, the human beings, when they first landed on the island. So that is easily the worst monster costume in this movie. It's probably the worst monster costume that Toho Studios ever produced. And it gets a lot of derision, and rightly so. But don't worry, we are going to get better from here. This is Mechanicong. Mechanicong is actually a pretty good costume in the sense that it looks a lot like Mechanicong looked in the cartoon show. So if you were a King Kong cartoon show purist, this suit actually did deliver for you because it was a lot like what you saw in the cartoon. Notice that Mechanicong has the same steampunk look that Mechagodzilla in the 1970s would have, although steampunk wasn't a word back then, but it does have that same aesthetic to it. So this is actually a pretty good costume, I think, although we're going to get a lot better with the next one. Easily the best monster suit in this film is Gorosaurus. This is the dinosaur that Kong fights when we first are introduced to Kong. And the Gorosaurus suit is quite good, certainly by Toho Suitmation standards of the 1960s. In fact, the Gorosaurus suit was so good that the following year, when they made Destroy All Monsters, they revived the Gorosaurus suit, and even though he was killed in this movie, they used Gorosaurus in Destroy All Monsters. In fact, that's worth taking a separate look at. Destroy All Monsters was a film where they used every monster they possibly could in one big rampage. At the time, they thought it was going to be the final Godzilla movie, although clearly that was not the case. There was supposed to be a scene where the underground digging monster Baragon comes up underneath the Arc of Triumph in Paris and destroys it. But the Baragon suit was a wreck, and the Gorosaurus suit was in great shape. So they just stuck Gorosaurus in and called him Baragon, and figured audiences wouldn't notice the difference. And at the time, that's probably true. They didn't notice the difference. They could hardly have foreseen that some of us would see these movies dozens of times and be catching their mistakes 50 years later. But anyway, here's Gorosaurus destroying the Arc of Triumph in Paris in Destroy All Monsters, 1968. I can't talk about Gorosaurus without showing you my Gorosaurus action figure. This is a pretty good likeness of Gorosaurus from the film. I'm not completely sold on it though, because I don't think that the coloring is right. At first I thought maybe the bumps on the skin were not pronounced enough, but I don't even think that's true. I think it's just that the Gorosaurus in the movies is a brighter shade of green, and that you then see the bumps on the skin a little more clearly. So I'm not saying I don't like the figure. I do like the figure. It's just not completely accurate to the way he appears in the films, but still a treasure. Okay. Admittedly, King Kong Escapes is a goofy movie by adults' standards, okay? If you're a kid, however, it's actually pretty good. We loved this film when we were kids, watching it on Creature Double Feature in Boston back in the 1970s, when they would play it routinely on a double feature with King Kong versus Godzilla. If you are young enough that you don't really see how ridiculously bad the King Kong suit is, and by young enough, I mean ages like between 5 and 10. If you are that young, this movie is actually pretty good for a monster movie. It moves right along. There's no slow parts because it's made for children, and it keeps the attention. Visually, it's stimulating. There's always something interesting happening on the screen. The one caveat I would give is if you plan to show this movie to a child in your family, just be aware that at the end of the movie, when King Kong is destroying Doctor Who's ship and the ship is sinking and Doctor Who dies aboard the ship, there's a little bit of blood. Not anything as bad as what's in today's movies, but it's not a completely bloodless movie. It's, think of it as a PG rating, not a G rating. So if you're thinking of showing this movie to a really young kid, like a kindergartner, you might want to look at it first. And when it's shown on television, they would edit out that little bit of gore. But if you're picking it up now on DVD or, downloading it online, you'll probably see the uncensored version, which does have a little bit of blood. It's not terrible, but I just want to make you aware of that. Other than that, it's fine for kids, though. And if you have a youngster who is interested in monsters, but you don't feel that they're old enough to see the modern series of King Kong and Godzilla films, this is an alternative you might want to take a look at. Also, if you just like goofy rubber-suited monster movies, and you're of any age, you definitely want to check this one out, if only for the sake of being able to say that you've seen it. So that's King Kong Escapes. I can't make a King Kong video, though, without showing you a couple of my favorite collectibles, because I am a big King Kong fan. And these are not specifically from King Kong Escapes. These are just plain King Kong collectibles. So please indulge me, and I'm going to show you a couple of goodies here, okay? So the first is that, remember I told you in the 1960s, there was a big monster boom, and this was what we now call the first generation of monster kids, okay? Because a lot of these old films were being re-released in the theaters or shown on Shock Theater late-night TV packages. So there was a lot of interest in King Kong, and the re-releases of King Kong always were popular. This is a paperback novelization of the original King Kong movie. It was published in 1965. It came out the same year I came out. And I remember reading it as a kid. I haven't read it in a while. But it's, reads like an ordinary novelization of a film that you might buy today. It's been through a few different editions, but I believe this is the first, and you can correct me in the comments if you think I'm wrong. But it's certainly an early publication. It is copyright 1965. So there you go. If you've never seen this or never even knew it existed, check out eBay. There's a million of them, not of this early of an edition, but there's a million other editions of King Kong out there. Okay, the first wave of Monster Kids was in the 1960s. I was just born then. The second wave of Monster Kids was in the 1970s, and we had it better because we had more monster movies on television by this time, and there were a lot more merchandise opportunities for us to satiate our monster hunger. So in the 1970s, there were lots and lots of monster figures. And I'm going to show you a King Kong posable action figure, which was, if you marketed it today, it wouldn't sell. But it was all the rage when it came out in 1974. And believe me, I was there. These things were everywhere. Considering how ubiquitous they were, it's a wonder that there aren't more of them around today. But here we go. Brace yourself. Yep, you got it. This is the rubber King Kong figure holding a girl, a blonde girl, probably supposed to be Ann Darrow, Fay Wray's character from the original, but not necessarily, because it theoretically could have been Linda Miller's character from this movie, because she was a blonde. So there's the figure. And what happened with these kind of figures were there were wires in here. I'm not going to bend it too much because it's a very old figure, but they were somewhat posable and certainly bendable. And so these were everywhere when I was a boy. Now, if you want to get a King Kong figure, you probably have to shell out for a more elaborate figure made of something a lot sturdier. But there you have it. One of my favorites. Okay? So listen, if you were a monster kid from the original wave, the 1960s, if you were a monster kid from the second wave, like I am, from the 1970s, or if you are a much, much younger monster fan and are possibly only just learning about some of these more obscure movies. But if you love any vintage horror, whether it's classic, great films like the original 1933 King Kong, or bottom-of-the-barrel rubber suit monster movies like King Kong Escapes, then I guarantee you're going to enjoy my book series, the Mourner's Woods books. They're available on Amazon.com. They're different monsters in different books, a completely different cast in each book. The books are completely unrelated. You don't have to have read one to understand the next one. And they're available on Amazon.com, 99 cents for an ebook. They're also available in paperback and in audiobook format. Thanks for spending time going through some vintage monster goodies with me. And I will talk to you the next time we're going to watch a scary movie. Have a great day.